gift from my mother. It wasn't a toy or a dress. It was a calculated insult designed to break a little girl's spirit. My husband didn't say a word. He just gently took our crying daughter out of the room. 3 hours later, while the birthday party was still dying down, he walked back into our living room accompanied by 3 police officers and a high-profile attorney. My mother, sitting casually on the couch with a glass of wine, scoffed and whispered, "You're making this way too dramatic." My husband didn't flinch. He walked over, slammed a thick legal folder onto the coffee table right in front of her and said, "No, you made it evidence." My mom spent 18 months planning to erase my daughter from our family legacy, but she destroyed her entire life in just 18 seconds. My name is Clara. I am 36 years old, and if there is one thing I've learned in my life, it's that some people value a perfect family tree far more than the actual human beings living under its branches. For my mother, Evelyn, appearance and lineage weren't just important. They were her entire religion. Growing up, everything had to be pristine, perfectly curated, and completely under her control. But her obsession with what she called the family bloodline turned into a toxic weapon the moment my daughter, Emily, entered the picture. I adopted Emily when she was just a baby during a previous relationship. She was my whole world, the sweetest soul, and the greatest joy of my life. A few years later, I met my husband, David. He loved Emily like his own from the very first day, and when we got married, we legally solidified our little family. Eventually, David and I had a biological son together, Leo. To David and me, love didn't have a biological prerequisite. We had 2 beautiful children. But to my mother, our household had suddenly been divided into 2 distinct categories, the true heir and the outsider. Evelyn instantly shifted. She began treating the children with a terrifying disparity, secretly resenting Emily for not being part of her precious bloodline while treating Leo like royalty. I thought it was just the typical, bitter favoritism of a stubborn older woman. I had no idea that beneath her cold shoulder lay a dark, calculated plan that she would spend the next 18 months meticulously piecing together. What followed was a slow, calculated psychological war that my mother waged from the shadows, an invisible campaign spanning a grueling 18 months. It started with small, seemingly innocent anomalies that most people would brush off as simple forgetfulness. At family gatherings, Emily's favorite meals were suddenly replaced by things she was allergic to, with my mother claiming her memory was just slipping in her old age. But then, the erasure became permanent. I first noticed it when looking through a professional photo album my mother had commissioned for her wedding anniversary. As I flipped through the glossy pages, a cold pit formed in my stomach. Emily had been systematically edited out of every single group shot. In places where she had been standing right next to me, holding my hand, there was only an unnaturally blurred background. When I furiously confronted her, she gasped, put a hand over her heart, and masterfully played the victim, blaming a faulty editing app and crying that I was attacking her. But the gaslighting didn't stop at photographs. Next came the family heirlooms. Items my grandmother had explicitly promised to my firstborn daughter were suddenly handed over to a distant cousin. Then came the ultimate red flag, a major update to the family trust fund. My mother casually mentioned she was restructuring her estate to ensure her grandchildren were properly secure. When the paperwork arrived, Leo's name was printed in bold lettering, while Emily's name was entirely absent from the registry. Every single time I demanded answers, my mother used the exact same patronizing, sweet grandmother routine to deflect suspicion. The tension in our house grew suffocating as I began quietly tracking these accidents, unaware that this wasn't just petty favoritism. It was a legal and financial layout designed to completely wipe my daughter out of existence. My mother assumed she was playing this game against a naive, grieving daughter who would never look past her tears. What she completely failed to realize was that she was also playing against my husband, David. David works in corporate law, a world where people don't look at intentions, they look at paper trails. He had been quietly observing Evelyn's behavior for months, and his professional instincts were screaming that this wasn't just a bitter grandmother acting out a personal grudge. He realized my mother was executing a highly sophisticated, multi-layered legal and financial strategy. She wasn't just trying to hurt Emily's feelings. She was trying to systematically strip our daughter of any legal identity, inheritance ties, or recognition within the extended family estate. When David discovered a strange notification regarding a minor property registration that required my signature, a signature I had never given, he knew he had crossed the line from family drama into actual criminal territory. Without telling my mother, David immediately hired a private investigator who specialized in white-collar family fraud, alongside a brilliant forensic accountant. Over the next year, they monitored Evelyn's financial moves, mail deliveries, and legal appointments. What they uncovered was horrifying. My mother had been visiting out-of-town notary publics, fabricating corporate resolutions, and using altered documents to convince estate trustees that Emily's adoption was legally invalid due to a technical loophole she had invented. She had spent 18 months forging signatures and altering registries, all to ensure that when the time came, Emily would be left legally nameless and penniless. David gathered every single bank record, every PI photograph, and every fraudulent document, quietly locking them away, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. The day of Emily's 9th birthday party arrived, and our backyard was filled with bright balloons, laughing children, and the sweet scent of birthday cake. The festive atmosphere was perfect, a welcome relief from the suffocating tension of the past few months. But the peace didn't last. Mid-afternoon, my mother arrived, wearing a smug, triumphant smile that immediately made my stomach churn. She waited until all our friends and family were gathered around the pavilion before she loudly insisted that Emily open her special gift in front of everyone. Emily eagerly tore away the pastel wrapping paper, expecting a doll or a book, but inside the box sat something entirely different. It was a thick manila envelope. Emily pulled out the contents, a cold, clinical legal document mixed with a deeply cruel, mocking handwritten letter from my mother. The letter explicitly stated that Emily had no rightful claim to the family name, while the accompanying forged affidavit claimed to officially dissolve her status within the family heritage. At just 9 years old, Emily couldn't comprehend the legal jargon, but she understood the weaponized cruelty behind it. Her eyes filled with confusion and terror, and she burst into heavy, heartbreaking tears right in front of her friends. My mother stood over her, completely unmoved, her face glowing with a malicious sense of absolute victory. She genuinely believed she had just delivered the final, crushing blow to my daughter's identity. The absolute silence that fell over the backyard was deafening, broken only by my daughter's choked sobs. Before my mother could utter another word to defend her theatrical display, David stepped forward. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated steel. He didn't yell, and he didn't make a scene in front of the children. Instead, he gently lifted Emily into his arms, whispering reassurances into her hair, and carried her out of the trauma and into the safety of the house. My mother, completely unfazed, smoothed down her expensive silk blouse, took a slow sip of her wine, and casually looked around at the horrified guests. Honestly, she whispered loudly to a relative nearby, Clara has always raised her to be so fragile. It's just a reality check about how the real world works. She genuinely believed she had established her absolute dominance. For the next 3 hours, she mingled, laughed, and acted as if she hadn't just shattered a 9-year-old child's heart. She had no idea the trap had already been sprung. As the party guests finally began to trickle out, the front door clicked open. David walked back into the living room, but he wasn't alone. Accompanying him were 3 uniformed police officers and a high-profile family law attorney whose face my mother immediately recognized from local legal circles. My mother's smile froze, her hand hovering over her wine glass. Trying to regain control of the room, she scoffed lightly and whispered, "David, really? You're making this entire situation way too dramatic." David didn't flinch. He walked directly over to the coffee table, ignoring her patronizing tone entirely. With a deafening thud, he slammed a thick legal folder right in front of her face. "No, Evelyn," David replied, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You made it evidence." By handing that envelope to Emily in front of dozens of witnesses, You just handed us the final, physical proof of mail fraud and corporate document forgery we needed to tie your entire 18-month operation together. The attorney stepped forward and opened the thick legal folder, laying out the stark reality of what my mother had done. In the span of just 18 seconds, Evelyn's entire world collapsed around her. As she looked down at the documents, her eyes raced across private investigator photographs of her secret notary visits, forensic accounting ledgers tracking her fraudulent transfers, and certified records of the forged signatures she had used to bypass estate laws. The smug, untouchable expression she had worn for 18 months completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and desperately called her corporate lawyer on speakerphone, screeching for him to stop this madness. But as she frantically explained the situation, her lawyer went completely pale on the other end of the line. The heavy silence through the phone speaker was deafening. "Evelyn," her attorney finally whispered, his voice shaking. "If you actually handed that affidavit over today, you didn't just alter an estate, you committed multiple federal felonies. You've completely destroyed your own defense, and there is absolutely nothing I can do to save you from this." In those 18 agonizing seconds, the crushing weight of her choices hit her all at once. The grand plan she had meticulously crafted to erase my daughter from the family legacy had backfired spectacularly. By trying to execute her final blow in public, she had walked directly into the legal trap David had set, turning her proudest moment into her own absolute ruin. The legal fallout was swift and absolute. My mother's desperate attempt to protect her bloodline cost her everything. She faced multiple corporate fraud charges, lost her standing in the family estate, and was entirely ostracized by the relatives she tried so hard to impress. Meanwhile, our family moved forward, completely unbothered by her shadow. Today, Emily is thriving, surrounded by a father and a brother who adore her, proving every single day that true family is defined by loyalty, love, and protection, not by genetics. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? How would you handle a family member trying? Check out the 2 gripping stories on your screen right now. They will definitely surprise you.